Sarah Thompson rushed through the busy morning traffic of downtown Atlanta, glancing at her watch for the fifth time. Her court hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m., and she had exactly 20 minutes to make it. She hadn't planned on being in court today. There were three important meetings lined up at her office where she worked as a senior data scientist. But this traffic ticket matter needed to be settled. The morning sun reflected off her silver laptop bag as she hurried up the courthouse steps. Her casual outfit, a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and comfortable sneakers, stood out among the formal suits and dresses that filled the courthouse hallway. She had chosen comfort over appearance, coming straight from an all-night data analysis session at her office. Inside the courtroom, Sarah noticed the immediate shift in atmosphere. The wooden benches were filled with people dressed in their best clothes. Lawyers in pressed suits moved about importantly, and court officials wore expressions of practiced seriousness. A few heads turned to look at her, some with raised eyebrows at her casual attire. Traffic violations, courtroom 302, Judge Morrison presiding, announced a court officer, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. Sarah took her place in line, clutching her laptop bag closer. She had spent the last week preparing for this moment, though not in the way most people would. While others might have consulted traffic lawyers or rehearsed apologies, she had done what she did best: analyze data. As the line moved forward, she observed Judge Richard Morrison. He sat high on his bench, his silver hair and black robes giving him an imposing presence. His reputation preceded him, known for being strict, traditional, and sometimes harsh with his rulings. Sarah watched as he dealt with case after case, his decision swift and final. Next case. Sarah Thompson, violation of traffic signal, 3rd Street and Pine Avenue, called out the court clerk. Sarah stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Judge Morrison looked up from his papers, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in her appearance. The slight downturn of his mouth told her everything she needed to know about his first impression. "Miss Thompson," he began, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that seemed common to all judges, "you've chosen to contest a simple traffic violation. Are you representing yourself today?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice clear and confident despite the judge's dismissive tone. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of impatience and mild annoyance. "Very well. The officer's report states that you ran a red light at 10:45 p.m. on April 15th. Do you deny this charge?" Sarah reached into her laptop bag, causing a slight stir in the courtroom. Most people simply stood there and either admitted their guilt or made excuses. "Your Honor, I'd like to present some evidence regarding this intersection and the traffic patterns." "Miss Thompson," Judge Morrison interrupted, his voice sharp, "this is a simple traffic violation. The officer's report is quite clear. Your casual approach to this court proceeding, from your attire to your apparent lack of understanding of proper court procedure, suggests a disregard for the seriousness of this matter." The courtroom had grown quiet. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the tension building. Sarah remained steady, her hand still on her laptop. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "given your obvious lack of preparation and respect for this court, I'm inclined to impose the maximum fine of $500 plus court costs." Sarah took a deep breath. She had anticipated this reaction. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her laptop bag. What Judge Morrison and everyone else in the courtroom didn't know was that she had spent the last week analyzing traffic pattern data, accident reports, and signal timing sequences for that very intersection. She had compiled a comprehensive report that would challenge not just her ticket, but the entire traffic enforcement system in that area. The real question was, would Judge Morrison give her the chance to present her findings, or had he already made up his mind based on what he saw on the surface? The courtroom remained silent as Sarah opened her laptop, its soft blue glow illuminating her face. Judge Morrison's impatience was clearly visible as he drummed his fingers on the wooden bench. "Miss Thompson, I've already made my ruling," he said firmly, reaching for his gavel, "unless you have a valid legal reason to." "Your Honor," Sarah interrupted politely but confidently, "I understand the seriousness of this court, and I apologize if my appearance suggests otherwise. I came directly from my workplace, where I've been analyzing data for the past 12 hours. The judge's eyebrows raised slightly at her professional tone, which contrasted sharply with his expectations. Still, his voice remained stern. "And what exactly does your workplace have to do with running a red light, Miss Thompson?" Sarah turned her laptop screen toward the court, pressing a few keys to connect to the courtroom's display system. The large screen behind her flickered to life, causing several heads to turn in surprise. "I work as a senior data scientist at TechGlobe Analytics," she began, her voice steady and clear. "When I received this ticket, something about the timing didn't add up. So I did what I do best. I analyzed the data." The first graph appeared on the screen, showing a complex but clearly organized pattern of traffic flow at the intersection in question. Judge Morrison's expression shifted slightly from dismissal to curiosity. "This is the traffic pattern analysis for the 3rd Street and Pine Avenue intersection over the past 6 months," Sarah explained, clicking to the next slide. "The red light at this intersection has a timing anomaly that occurs specifically between 10:30 p.m. and 11:00 p.m. The courtroom stirred with interest. Even the court clerk had stopped shuffling papers to watch. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly, his previous impatience giving way to professional interest. "As you can see from this data," Sarah continued, pointing to specific peaks in her graph, "the yellow light duration at this intersection is shortened by 1.8 seconds during these specific hours, giving drivers significantly less time to react than the standard safety guidelines recommend." She clicked to another screen, revealing a series of incident reports and statistics. "In the past 6 months, there have been 27 tickets issued at this exact intersection during this specific time frame. That's a 300% increase compared to any other time of day." Judge Morrison removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully as he studied the data. The dismissive attitude he had shown earlier was rapidly disappearing. "Furthermore," Sarah said, pulling up another chart, "I've cross-referenced these incidents with traffic camera footage timestamps. In 85% of these cases, including mine, the yellow light duration was demonstrably shorter than the state-mandated minimum of 4.5 seconds. The judge's demeanor had completely changed. He was now sitting up straight, his full attention focused on the presentation before him. The other people in the courtroom watched in amazement as this seemingly unprepared woman in casual clothes delivered a professional-grade analysis of traffic patterns. "Miss Thompson," Judge Morrison spoke, his tone notably different from before, "are you suggesting that there's a systematic issue with this traffic signal?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied, pulling up her final slide. "And I can demonstrate that this shortened yellow light timing disproportionately affects drivers during lower traffic evening hours, leading to an unusually high number of citations that may not be legally valid." The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Several people who had been waiting for their own traffic violation cases were now taking notes frantically on their phones. Judge Morrison sat back in his chair, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. He looked at Sarah again, but this time he saw beyond the casual clothes and direct manner. He saw a professional who had brought hard evidence and scientific analysis into his courtroom. "Miss Thompson," he said finally, folding his hands on his desk, "I believe we need to examine this evidence in detail. Would you be willing to walk us through your complete analysis?" Sarah stood confidently at the podium as she began her detailed presentation. The courthouse, which had been filled with the usual shuffle of impatient waiting and whispered conversations, was now completely silent. Every eye was fixed on the screens displaying her data. "Your Honor, if I may continue," Sarah said, clicking to a new slide. "What initially caught my attention wasn't just my own ticket, but a pattern I discovered while researching this intersection." The screen now showed a map of the city, with the 3rd Street and Pine Avenue intersection highlighted in red. Around it were dozens of small dots, each representing a traffic citation. "These dots represent every ticket issued at this intersection in the past year," Sarah explained, her voice clear and professional. "Notice how they cluster primarily during evening hours, particularly between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. Judge Morrison, who had completely abandoned his earlier stern demeanor, leaned forward with genuine interest. "And you believe this clustering is directly related to the traffic signal timing issue you mentioned?" "Yes, Your Honor." Sarah pulled up a split-screen view. On the left, you can see normal yellow light timing during daytime hours, a full 4.5 seconds. On the right is footage from the night I received my citation, showing only 2.7 seconds of yellow light time. The court officer, who had been standing quietly by the door, moved closer to get a better view. Even the court clerk had stopped typing to watch the presentation. But there's more, Sarah continued, her fingers moving skillfully across her laptop keyboard. I've analyzed demographic data for all tickets issued at this intersection. She paused briefly, ensuring she had everyone's complete attention. The shortened yellow light timing disproportionately affects people traveling to and from certain neighborhoods. The next slide showed a heat map of the city, with clear patterns emerging in the traffic flow data. Judge Morrison's expression grew increasingly serious as he studied the implications. Miss Thompson, he interrupted, his voice now carrying a note of concern. Are you suggesting that this traffic signal malfunction might have broader implications? Sarah nodded, pulling up another chart. The data shows that during these specific hours, 73% of the drivers cited were traveling from neighborhoods that are predominantly minority communities. Many of these individuals work evening shifts and regularly travel through this intersection during the affected hours. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Several people in the gallery began taking photos of the screens with their phones, until the court officer quietly asked them to stop. Furthermore, Sarah continued, clicking to her next slide, I've compiled accident data from this intersection. The screen filled with a graph showing a sharp increase in near-miss incidents and minor collisions during the problematic time period. Judge Morrison removed his glasses, rubbing his temples thoughtfully. The weight of the evidence was clearly affecting him. Miss Thompson, how long did it take you to compile all this information? 7 days, Your Honor, Sarah replied. I used publicly available traffic camera footage, citation records, and demographic data from the city's open data portal. As a data scientist, I'm trained to spot patterns that might not be immediately obvious. The judge nodded slowly, looking at Sarah with new respect. And you did all this because of a simple traffic ticket? Sarah straightened her shoulders, her voice firm but respectful. No, Your Honor. I did this because when something doesn't add up, it usually means there's a bigger story to uncover. As a data scientist, my job is to find the truth in the numbers. Judge Morrison looked around his courtroom, noting the engaged expressions on everyone's faces. The same people who had earlier judged Sarah for her casual appearance were now hanging on her every word. Miss Thompson, the judge said, his tone now completely different from their initial interaction, I believe you've uncovered something that requires immediate attention. Would you be willing to share your complete findings with the court's technical team? The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed completely. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess to consult with the court's technical advisor, leaving Sarah standing at the podium with her laptop. People in the gallery whispered among themselves, some trying to catch her attention with admiring glances. Mark Chen, the court's technical advisor, rushed into the courtroom carrying his own laptop. He was a middle-aged man with thick glasses who looked both excited and slightly nervous as he approached Sarah. Miss Thompson, he said, extending his hand, I've been reviewing your initial data as it came through our system. Your analysis is remarkable. I've been monitoring traffic patterns for 5 years, but I never connected these dots. Sarah smiled politely, recognizing a fellow data enthusiast. Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective, she replied, turning her laptop so they could both see the screen. I've also found some interesting correlations with weather patterns and traffic density. When Judge Morrison returned to the bench 15 minutes later, his entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the stern, dismissive expression he had worn earlier. Instead, he looked deeply concerned and somewhat humbled. Miss Thompson, he began, his voice carrying through the now packed courtroom, Mr. Chen has confirmed your findings about the traffic signal timing irregularities. But I understand you have more to share with this court. Sarah nodded, pulling up a new set of visualizations. Yes, Your Honor. While analyzing the traffic patterns, I discovered something even more concerning. She clicked to display a map of the entire city district. This isn't the only intersection with similar timing issues. The crowd in the courtroom stirred. Several lawyers who had been waiting for other cases moved closer to get a better view of the screens. As you can see, Sarah continued, highlighting several points on the map. There are 4 other intersections in the city with similar patterns. All of them show the same shortened yellow light timing during evening hours, and all of them are located along major routes between working-class neighborhoods and industrial areas. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his brow furrowed. And the demographic patterns you identified earlier, do they appear at these locations as well? Yes, Your Honor. Sarah brought up a series of pie charts. The data shows a consistent pattern. At all 5 intersections, over 70% of citations during these hours are issued to residents from minority communities, particularly those working evening or night shifts. The courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. A reporter who had been sketching in the background was now furiously taking notes. Mark Chen raised his hand politely. Your Honor, if I may. At the judge's nod, he continued, I verified Ms. Thompson's methodology. Her analysis is sound, and these findings suggest a systemic issue that requires immediate investigation. Judge Morrison removed his reading glasses, placing them carefully on his desk. He looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed admiration with regret for his earlier assumptions. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room, what began as a simple traffic violation has uncovered what appears to be a significant issue of public safety and potential systemic bias. May I ask what you do specifically at TechGlobe Analytics? Sarah stood a little straighter. I lead the AI Ethics and Fairness Division, Your Honor. My team specializes in identifying hidden biases in automated systems and their real-world impacts on communities. The judge nodded slowly, a slight smile crossing his face. It seems we have the right person in our courtroom today. He turned to address the court clerk. Please contact the Department of Transportation immediately. We'll need a comprehensive review of all traffic signal systems in these areas. Looking back at Sarah, he continued, Miss Thompson, would you be willing to serve as a technical consultant for this review? Your expertise would be invaluable in ensuring we address these issues thoroughly and fairly. Sarah sat in Judge Morrison's chambers later that afternoon, surrounded by city officials who had been quickly summoned to the courthouse. The small room was crowded with the Director of Transportation, 2 traffic engineers, and representatives from the City Council. Mark Chen sat next to Sarah, his laptop open and ready to help explain the technical details. Judge Morrison cleared his throat, addressing the gathered officials. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe Ms. Thompson's findings require our immediate attention. The implications of these traffic signal irregularities go far beyond a single citation. Sarah connected her laptop to the room's display screen, showing a more detailed version of her analysis. If you look at the historical data, she explained, pointing to a timeline chart, these timing changes began approximately 8 months ago, shortly after the traffic system's last software update. The Director of Transportation, Mrs. Rodriguez, leaned forward with concern. Are you suggesting this was programmed intentionally? Not necessarily, Sarah replied, pulling up the system's code documentation. Sometimes biases can emerge from seemingly neutral programming decisions. In this case, the system was likely optimized for peak traffic hours without considering the impact on evening commuters. Mark Chen nodded enthusiastically. Ms. Thompson's analysis shows how automated systems can unintentionally discriminate if we don't carefully consider all usage patterns. One of the traffic engineers raised his hand. But why didn't our regular system checks catch this? Sarah clicked to another screen showing the monitoring protocols. The system checks focus on peak hours and accident rates. Since these issues occur during lower traffic periods, they fell outside the standard monitoring parameters. Judge Morrison watched the technical discussion with growing understanding. The same woman he had nearly dismissed hours ago was now teaching city officials about the complexities of automated system bias. What amazes me, the judge interjected, is how quickly you identified these patterns, Ms. Thompson. Most people would have simply paid the fine. Sarah smiled slightly. In my work at TechGlobe, we constantly look for hidden patterns in data. When I noticed the timing felt off that night, it triggered my professional curiosity. Mrs. Rodriguez turned to her team. We need to audit all traffic systems citywide. If these issues exist at 5 intersections, there could be more we haven't discovered. I can help with that, Sarah offered, pulling up a framework she had created. I've developed a preliminary audit methodology that can identify similar patterns across the entire traffic network. The city officials exchanged impressed looks. What had started as a simple traffic court case was evolving into a major system overhaul. Judge Morrison stood up, walking to the window of his chambers. Miss Thompson, he said, turning back to face her, I owe you an apology. When you first entered my courtroom, I made assumptions that were entirely unfair and unprofessional. The room fell silent. It was rare for a judge to admit such a thing, especially in front of city officials. Your Honor, Sarah responded respectfully. What matters is that you were willing to look at the evidence and take action. That's all any data scientist can ask for. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up, straightening her jacket. We need to move quickly on this. Ms. Thompson, would you be willing to lead a task force to address these issues? We can offer a consulting contract through the city. Before Sarah could respond, one of the city council representatives added, and we should consider implementing regular algorithmic bias audits across all our automated systems. This situation shows we need more proactive oversight. Judge Morrison nodded in agreement. Sometimes it takes an unexpected situation to reveal our blind spots, both in our systems and in ourselves. Sarah looked around the room, realizing how much had changed since morning. She had walked into the courthouse expecting to fight a traffic ticket. Now she was being asked to help perform the entire city's traffic system. The next morning, Sarah's story spread through the city like wildfire. Local news stations camped outside the courthouse, eager to interview the data scientist who had uncovered systematic problems in the city's traffic system. Inside, Sarah was busy working with Mark Chen and the technical team, setting up a temporary office in a converted conference room. The media attention is getting intense, Mark said, showing Sarah the morning headlines on his tablet. They're calling you the algorithm whistleblower. Sarah shook her head, focusing on her computer screen. I'm not a whistleblower. I'm just doing what any data scientist would do, following the patterns where they lead. Judge Morrison knocked on the conference room door, entering with a stack of files. Ms. Thompson, you might want to see these. We've received dozens of emails from people who got tickets at those intersections. They're requesting reviews of their cases. The judge looked different today. His usual formal demeanor had softened, and he carried himself with a more approachable air. He pulled up a chair next to Sarah's workstation, genuinely interested in understanding her process. I've been thinking about yesterday, he said, watching as she sorted through data on multiple screens. How many other systems in our city might have similar hidden biases? Sarah turned to face him. That's the challenge with automated systems, Your Honor. They can inherit and amplify existing biases without anyone noticing. It's why my team at TechGlobe spends so much time testing for fairness. Mrs. Rodriguez entered the room, followed by two members of her technical staff. The mayor wants an update, she announced. The press is asking questions about other potential issues in city systems. Sarah pulled up a new presentation on the main screen. I've identified 3 main areas we need to address, she explained, pointing to her diagrams. First, fixing the immediate traffic signal timing issues. Second, reviewing all automated tickets issued during the affected periods. And third, creating a new testing framework to prevent similar problems in the future. Mark raised his hand excitedly. I've been reviewing Ms. Thompson's proposed testing framework. It's brilliant. It could help us catch these issues before they affect anyone. The room buzzed with activity as more city officials arrived. Sarah's temporary office had become the command center for a major city initiative. Phones rang constantly with calls from other municipalities wanting to learn about her findings. Ms. Thompson, one of the traffic engineers, called out, "We found similar patterns in 2 more intersections across town. Our detection method worked perfectly." Judge Morrison watched the scene with a mixture of pride and humility. You know, he said quietly to Sarah, yesterday morning, I'd almost made a terrible mistake. I looked at you and saw what I expected to see, not who you really are. Sarah paused her typing, turning to face him. We all have biases, Your Honor. The important thing is recognizing them and being willing to change. A young intern rushed into the room with more printouts. The governor's office just called, she announced breathlessly. They want to know if this could be happening in other cities too. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at Sarah thoughtfully. This could become a model for traffic system reform across the state, maybe even the country. Sarah stood up, walking to the whiteboard where she had sketched out a project timeline. We need to be methodical about this, she said, adding new notes. Real change takes time and careful analysis. We can't just rush to implement solutions without understanding the full scope of the problem. Judge Morrison nodded approvingly. You've started something important here, Ms. Thompson. something much bigger than a traffic ticket. Sarah looked around the busy room, at the engineers poring over data, the officials making calls, and the growing stack of case files waiting for review. What had begun as her simple decision to challenge an unfair ticket had evolved into a movement for systemic change. 1 month after Sarah's courtroom revelation, the landscape of traffic enforcement in the city had changed dramatically. The courthouse's largest conference room had been converted into a permanent project office, with Sarah's data analysis team working alongside city officials to implement systemic changes. "Look at these numbers," Mark Chen said excitedly, pointing to his screen during their morning meeting. "Since we fixed the yellow light timing at all identified intersections, accident rates have dropped by 40% during evening hours." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on a different set of data. "More importantly," she added, pulling up a new chart, "we've identified and reversed over 3,000 incorrect citations from the past 8 months. Judge Morrison, who now regularly attended these morning briefings, shook his head in amazement. "That's 3,000 people who were unfairly penalized by a system we thought was working perfectly." The room was filled with maps, charts, and computer screens displaying real-time traffic data from across the city. What had started as one woman's challenge to a traffic ticket had grown into a full-scale reform project. Mrs. Rodriguez walked in, holding a newspaper. "Have you seen today's headline?" she asked, holding up the paper. The front page showed a photo of Sarah working with her team, under the headline, "Data Scientists' Traffic Court Challenge Sparks National Conversation on AI Bias." The governor called again. Mrs. Rodriguez continued, "5 other states have requested our new testing framework. They want to audit their own traffic systems." Sarah remained focused on her work, typing rapidly on her keyboard. "We need to make sure they understand this isn't just about traffic lights," she said. "It's about how automated systems can affect people's lives in ways we don't expect." A young intern rushed in with a stack of letters. "More testimonials from people who had their tickets reversed," she explained, placing them on Sarah's desk. Some of them were facing serious financial hardships because of these fines. Judge Morrison picked up one of the letters and read it silently. His expression softened as he reached the end. "Miss Thompson," he said, looking up at Sarah, "do you remember what I said to you that first morning in court?" Sarah paused her typing, turning to face him. "You said I showed a lack of respect for the judicial process." The judge nodded sadly. "I made a judgment based on appearance and assumptions. Now, a month later, you taught this entire courthouse more about true justice than I could have imagined." Mark interrupted the moment, calling out from his computer, "Sarah, you need to see this. The National Traffic Safety Board just released new guidelines for automated enforcement systems. They're citing your research as a key influence." The room buzzed with excitement as everyone gathered around Mark's screen. The new guidelines incorporated many of the testing protocols Sarah had developed, making them standard practice across the country. "This is exactly what we needed," Mrs. Rodriguez said, scanning the document. "System-wide change that prevents these issues from happening in the first place." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city streets below. She could see the intersection where her story began, now equipped with properly timed signals and new monitoring systems. "You know what's remarkable?" Judge Morrison said, joining her at the window. "All of this happened because you refused to simply pay a fine and walk away. You saw something wrong and used your skills to prove it." Sarah smiled slightly. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of resistance. The room continued to buzz with activity behind them. Phones ringing, computers humming, people discussing data and plans. The project had taken on a life of its own, growing far beyond what anyone had expected. "We're not done yet," Sarah said, turning back to her team. "This is just the beginning. There are other systems out there, other biases waiting to be discovered. We need to keep looking, keep questioning, keep analyzing." Judge Morrison nodded in agreement. "And thanks to you, Ms. Thompson, we now know exactly how to do that." 6 months after Sarah Thompson first walked into that courtroom, she stood at a podium in City Hall's main auditorium. The room was packed with journalists, city officials, and community leaders from across the country. Judge Morrison sat in the front row, alongside Mrs. Rodriguez and Mark Chen, all of them beaming with pride. "Today marks the official launch of the Fair Systems Initiative," Sarah announced, her voice confident and clear. What began as a single traffic ticket has led us to completely reimagine how we implement and monitor automated systems in our cities. Behind her, large screens displayed the impressive results of their 6-month project. Traffic accidents had decreased by 60% at previously problematic intersections. Over 5,000 incorrect citations had been identified and reversed. Most importantly, the new testing framework had been adopted by 50 cities across the country. But this isn't just about traffic systems, Sarah continued, clicking to the next slide. We discovered similar patterns in other automated systems, from parking enforcement to building code violations. Each system had hidden biases that needed to be addressed. Judge Morrison stood up to join her at the podium. Gone was the stern, judgmental man who had nearly fined her that first morning. In his place stood a humble advocate for change. Miss Thompson has taught us all a valuable lesson, he said, addressing the crowd. Justice isn't just about following rules, it's about questioning whether those rules are truly fair for everyone. Mrs. Rodriguez took the stage next, holding up a thick document. The City Council has unanimously approved the creation of a permanent Office of Algorithmic Fairness, she announced. And we're honored to announce that Ms. Thompson has agreed to serve as its first director. The audience erupted in applause. In the back of the room, Sarah spotted some familiar faces. People whose tickets she had helped overturn, now volunteering as community advisors for the new office. Mark Chen rushed up to the podium with breaking news on his tablet. We just got word, he announced excitedly. 3 more states have adopted our testing framework. The movement is spreading faster than we expected. Sarah looked out at the crowd, remembering that morning 6 months ago when she had rushed into court in her casual clothes, clutching her laptop. How different things looked now. A reporter raised her hand. Miss Thompson, what would you say to other people who notice something wrong in their communities? Sarah thought for a moment before answering. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, dig deeper. Use whatever skills you have, whether it's data science, legal knowledge, or community organizing, to shine a light on the problem. Judge Morrison nodded in agreement. And to those in positions of authority, he added, remember that expertise and wisdom can come in many forms. My biggest mistake that day was letting my assumptions cloud my judgment. As the presentation concluded, Sarah walked through the crowd, stopping to talk with community members and technical experts who had gathered for the launch. The Fair Systems Initiative had grown far beyond anything she had imagined that first day in traffic court. You know what the best part is? Mark said, joining her with his ever-present laptop. We're just getting started. Other cities are finding new issues to tackle every day. Mrs. Rodriguez approached with a group of mayors from other cities. They'd all want to know your secret, she said with a smile. How did you turn a traffic ticket into a national movement? Sarah looked around the room, at the charts showing lives improved, at the community members sharing their stories, at Judge Morrison proudly explaining the initiative to newcomers. There's no secret, she replied. I just refused to accept that unfairness was normal, even in something as small as a traffic light. As the event wound down, Sarah gathered with her core team, Judge Morrison, Mrs. Rodriguez, and Mark Chen. Together, they had transformed a moment of prejudice into a movement for change. Ready for what comes next? Judge Morrison asked. Sarah smiled, already thinking about the new challenges ahead. Always ready. After all, dead never sleeps, and neither does justice.